Recorded now. All right. All right. So welcome everyone to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And this is part of the Head of Remote podcast series, where we're exploring the position of Head of Remote, called different things in different places, but just for the generalization, we're saying Head of Remote. But Valentina, I have you here. You are the Empress of Remote, but also a Head of Product Excellence with some very specific knowledge in product operations. And I wanted to talk to you because you are a Head of Product Excellence and a fractional CPO. How does that lead into Head of Remote?
So if you look at what a head of remote actually does, it's basically facilitating the way you work in a remote environment. And very often, since it's such a new position, a lot of companies are kind of confused where to put this role, because it's not really HR, it's not really operations, it's not really IT, it's somewhere like all over the place. And for me, being head of product excellence in the company I'm at the moment means that from a product perspective, I have the opportunity to actually help develop all the processes across the company, because at the end of the day, in a product-led organization, everything flows into product. And in my case, we have different sites. So we have people in Switzerland, we have people in Belgium, we have people in Ireland. And even though the company itself has a hybrid model, the fact that everyone is working from different locations and some people are fully remote means we need to work as if everyone was remote. It's kind of this remote first mindset. And being in this product excellence role, focusing on operations and processes across the entire innovation journey in the organization, gives me kind of this authority to help the company move towards a more remote friendly setup, even though the company policy itself may not self-identify as remote first. Because let's be very clear, remote work practices are just good work practices. Yeah, like even if everybody in the team is in the same room, documenting your work can still make it a lot easier if somebody goes on vacation for 3 weeks, which happens in Europe. So for me, it's kind of how can we make sure that everybody actually works effectively and efficiently together wherever they are.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of companies don't have the budget for someone like Head of Remote. And so I wondered if you would just reflect on your journey on sort of how you came to take this position, because I found it very relatable as we were talking earlier.
So I think with Head of Remote, like if you ask somebody what is a head of remote, you ask 3 people and you get 5 different definitions, because it's not like a CFO. Okay, they do the finances and we all know what that means. There's spreadsheets with numbers involved. But with a head of remote, some put it into HR, some put it into operations, but it's not really either. It's also not entirely IT, even though they usually have a lot of influence on the tech stack that you end up using. So what is this? So in my experience, most heads of a remote aren't necessarily called head of remote, but they are attached to one of these functions. So either HR or operations or engineering. In my case, it's operations. And then from there, they branch out and start influencing more parts of the organization, not necessarily as the HR expert, but as the process expert for remote HR needs, not at the operations expert, but as the remote expert in operations needs. So you become kind of this transversal facilitator across the organization to make sure that the structure in place actually helps. And by the more open the company is of having this role being a +1 to an already existing role, the easier it's also to make the influence. I have seen some companies who said, okay, head of remote, but actually we need some remote practices. Let's hire people experience persons into the HR team. That then has no budget, no influence on anything, and no one takes them seriously, and no one trusts them because they are in HR. And I'm sorry for all the HR people out there, but in many companies, people don't necessarily go to HR when they have problems across the board, because there is kind of a little bit of a trust issue. It's getting better, but it's still there. So by having and you need the head of remote to be on the leadership level. There will be no consistent change if it's not modeled at the top, which means the head of remote, or however you call them, needs to have the influence on the leadership level, both to model behavior, but also to kind of bring the other leaders along that may not have the same level of experience.
Right. So one for the sort of for the authority that it gives. And I was wondering, how much buy-in do you need to have from leadership for remote, like to have a remote first organization? I'm sure many
Well, the
people would rather
buy-in.
have the in-person setup, right? But that's just not the reality.
No, it's
So
not the reality. And you kind of, you need a leadership that is aware of their own bias. It's very easy as a leader to say office is better because you have you can probably afford somebody to pick up your kids from school, or you can afford, or you have the office just for you in the office building. You do not have to do all your one-on-ones in an open space where everybody can hear what your problems are, which obviously means that people don't talk about their problems because they don't want their colleagues to hear about them. So there is a lot of privilege when a leader says, I think office is better, because anyone in their position would probably like the office in that situation. But then for another employee, it might be a lot more complicated because it adds the commute, it adds, if you're neurodivergent, being in an open office is complete meltdown scenario. So it's difficult. And it's not always easy for leaders to actually understand that it's not that people hate the office. It's not that people don't want to talk to their colleagues. It's what it means to get to the office and how it impacts the rest of your life that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. So the question is, how can we mitigate that? And I don't think that leaders necessarily also need to stay home. They can, like, if they feel more at home in the office, that's totally fine. But if leadership is not on board with the remote first, it doesn't happen. Because, like, there's this adage that people say, oh, anyone can be a leader. And that is true in some cases, but in companies, usually, whether you have a certain level of seniority or not, it does make it easier to lead than not to lead. So if you want to, for example, create a culture of, when we make a decision, we write down why we made that decision, so that next year we know why we made that decision, and the leadership never writes down why they made a decision, this is not going to happen in the rest organization either, because people, they do as you do, they don't do as you say.
right, they model the leader's behavior. That is why it's so
Exactly.
important for leaders to model the behavior that they want to see, because
Exactly.
everybody mimics the leader of, I mean, to a certain extent, like it's just sort of shown.
Which is
So
actually hard, because a lot of leaders got into the leadership position not because they're good writers and good note takers, but because they were good at speaking and at presenting and getting people to get on board with them. So, like, suddenly we are asking them to use a skill that they might not have developed yet.
right, that visionary skill that they have, right, has to be done in a new medium, perhaps
Exactly.
in this way. So yeah, I don't know how much you see sort of from different sorts of companies, but are people embracing the remote first model, or as we see, like with Amazon just announcing yesterday, mandating 5 days back to work? Is it sort of a mix still?
It's a mix, and it's harder for big companies to embrace remote first than for smaller companies. I mean, if you're a startup and you were built during the pandemic and you've never had an office, yeah, whatever, you just continue as you were. If you're a 100, 200 person company, the shift is all. But if you are thousands of people and you have optimized the last 50 years of your existence, the last 70 years, or even just the last 10 years of your existence, you have optimized every single process and decision-making
Good
around
point.
being in an office. That's a lot of policies and processes that you need to change.
That's a
That's a
really good point.
lot of work for a lot of people who actually probably rather prefer to do things as they were done. Not because they are lazy, but because the sheer amount of change that you have to do, the amount of policy changes that you have to do. If you're in Germany, you probably have a work council involved. Like,
Right.
it's not just if you're a small company, the leader can just say, hey, I think this is the better thing, we're going to figure it out. But if you are, like, depending on your company structure, on your legal structure, on the age of your company, that might be not that easy. And then depending on how many people you have, it's very easy for a 30-something, 20-something to work from home, figure out the loneliness stuff because you just like sign up for a baseball club or whatever. But it's very different if you are 50 plus, because you may not have that skill. It's a learnable skill. But if you, let's say you have 3,000 people in your company, and you have to teach now all of these people how to work remotely, how to motivate remotely, how to be accountable for their own stuff, and how to not get stuck at home, and how to not feel guilty because they feel they are not doing as much because they are not going to the office. That's a very high order. So I understand why a lot of companies said, okay, we've tried it for the last 3 years. It has been a complete chaos. We feel we are losing control, so let's go back to how it was before. Now, this is a little bit like you taking your child, throwing it into the water, and since it can't swim, never allowing it to go back to the beach again, because clearly this child was not meant for swimming. So it is kind of short-sighted, but I understand the control. I understand how difficult it is to kind of move this ocean liner into a different direction, because the entire inertia is going against the work from home. And work from home, people who argue for work from home usually argue from a what is good for the individual employee point of view.
Yeah.
Because that is easiest to explain. As a company owner, as a stakeholder in the company, I'm sorry, I don't care about the individual employee. I care about the bottom line, and chaos is not good for the bottom line. So let's just go back to stability. I think that is the underlying problem, that as from an organizational change perspective, we have not figured out yet how you can do transformative changes like moving an entire corporate structure from an office to work from home, not just on the individual skill level, but on everything, because it's so many policies that are involved that it's mind-boggling.
Seems to me like there's a high demand and need for heads of remote as an alternative solution.
Definitely.
Right? I mean, it doesn't have to just be one person in an organization. You could have sort of a team of people that are helping to institutionalize flexibility where it makes sense. And I am not anti-office by any means. I mean, my husband, I have friends who love the office, and I think people should work where they're most productive. And I think
For me, it's about the choice.
yeah, the
Like, you
choice. I
should
want
have
to
the choice.
choose. I want to choose.
Exactly.
Like, if my team needs me, I'll totally be there for my
Yeah.
team. Like, of course I would go in.
So there was it last year? No, 2 years or 3 years ago in the UK, they did this really, really big experiment about the 4-day work week. And I think this was actually a way better example than the pandemic for remote work, because all the companies that wanted to test it out, they kind of self-appointed them that they wanted to test it. They trained the entire workforce. They aligned everybody around what is the current status of productivity? What does good enough look like? What is the vision that we are having? And then they started, there was coaching involved, there were external people involved who helped reorganize the policies and kind of help solve this. Oh, we have 5-day customer support. Now we are only working 4 days a week. How can we serve our customers if we still need to offer, like, how do we solve the 5th day, basically? So there was this concerted effort with expert, but with very concerted effort towards, this is what it looks like now. This is what we think we can achieve. This is the time we're going to invest in testing this. And these are the stop gaps where we're going to stop and to say, hey, are we still on track, or do we need to change something? That never happened with remote work. With remote, it were like, oh, okay, sorry, you can't, take your computer, go home, and good luck. And most companies never did this. Okay, let's just stop and see about how was it before and how is it now and what's the gap. And then they start counting badge swipes to see if people go to the office instead of looking at productivity. Like they start to measure entirely the wrong things because then panic sets in because things are not working out that they expected. But there was no plan. There never was a plan.
Yeah, indeed. I've always thought of it as like just a change, your standard change management process. You're moving from one medium of work to another, and I just yeah. In any case,
But no one
we're preaching
managed
at the
it. That's
choir,
where the head of remote
right?
role comes
And
in.
also we
Like you
did
need somebody to manage this.
indeed, and it went overnight. And people
Yeah.
in their minds have the images of the umbrella drinks and beaches, right? And that is, we all found out that that is not
Oh,
what
like
it
sand
is.
in your laptop's charging slot is not good.
Right on the beach, you want to be on the beach in any case. Okay, so I have a couple of more questions. May I go
You
5 minutes over? Okay, if
Yes.
only 5 minutes over. So if you're coming into an organization like this, like, and management knows they need to be hybrid, but they're not fully in, but you're interested in sort of this head of remote role, where do you start? Where did you start when you came into the organization? Where did you start with, like, documentation, or did you talk to people?
No,
How
you
how
start
did that
with talking
evolve?
to people. Now, if it's a small, if it's a startup, usually the recommendation is talk to everyone to get kind of a lay of the land, which if we are talking about thousands of employee or even hundreds of employee, that's not
Yeah,
going to
that's
happen. Like
right.
there's a time constraint in there. So what you should do is kind of you talk to everybody in leadership and then you ask them, who do you think do I have to talk to? And then you ask those people, who do you? And on the third path, on the third step, you're going to end up with the real company influencers who can kind of cover for you more or less what most people are thinking, because every company has those kind of people who seem to know everyone and seem to know everything. And you need to discover these people to kind of get a lay of the land. And then you figure out what is actually the biggest pain point for leadership, which sounds a little bit
Hmm.
counterintuitive because most people would say, yeah, but let's like solve the biggest pain points for the individual contributor. But at the very beginning, you have to show to leadership why you are so important to them. So you need to lower their stress level.
Brilliant.
And sometimes that's just, I'm in too many meetings as a leader because now people can't just catch me for 5 minutes. So everybody books a meeting into my calendar. So you start with leadership calendar hygiene. So it depends a little bit what is the main, or they say, oh, now everything takes forever because instead of writing a Slack or a Teams message, people book a meeting. And then if there's no slot in my calendar, they book the meeting for 4 weeks from now. And then the decision doesn't get made.
Right. That very real problem. I mean, it sounds silly,
Yeah.
but it's like the teams that I'm working with now, I see this, right? Like people just don't have, yeah. So it's a very, yeah. So, all right. So you start with like the highest pain point in that. And I want to ask about documentation. I hear a lot about like company handbooks and playbooks and team playbooks. Do you also see that as something useful for companies and teams, or is it just for certain teams?
I think it is useful. It has to go hand in hand with training for everybody in the company, though, how to search. And that
Ooh,
sounds very basic, but the amount of people who do not know how to do a good search query is astonishing. And if you wrote the handbook, you will always find everything that you need. And you actually might not be aware that people use different words. They don't even know what is in the handbook. They think this is just an overkill. So actually sitting down with people and doing kind of a discovery in product work that would be like customer discovery and have them, hey, what do you know about our onboarding process? No idea. Okay, can you share your screen and show me how you would search for information about that? And if you were a hiring manager, how you would search for that information in the handbook? Or if you're using Notion or Confluence or like whatever tool you use, because all of the tools allow you to search for a word, but also to kind of refine the search. I only want to, I don't know, look for stuff that was written by this person or only in this team, etc., etc. And people don't know that and then this, depending also on the age, on the savviness with technology, a lot of companies only started to use wikis, etc., after the pandemic. So people have like 10 years of experience with paper manuals, and now suddenly they have to like look online. It's a different type of searching for information. And not everybody, if you're a head of remote, you're probably very savvy with technology. Like, don't expect that everybody is as savvy as you are. Sit
Yeah.
down and see what is their level. And it's crazy, but sometimes like this, my one recommendation for managers is have one-on-ones at the very minimum once per month with all of your direct reports. And if you're managing managers, get a skip one-on-one in once per year. And people look at me like, oh, this is a good idea. Like it's so obvious for somebody who has been working remotely forever or somebody who operates in our space. But if you've always been in the office and you have met your colleagues for lunch anyway, because like there's one cafeteria, you never
Yeah.
needed structured one-on-ones because you would bump into people all the time. So you knew what's happening because they come into the office and they look like, oh, allergy season is on again. You just see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But now you don't see that anymore. So you have to make space for these conversations. And most people, they don't think about it. They forget. It's not bad intention. It's just they don't know that this is something that they can actually do.
I really like the training aspect of simple things like that. You wouldn't think, I mean, I'm working with a company now and they don't know how to thread in
Yeah.
Slack conversations.
Yeah.
And it's maddening for somebody who's like a threader, right? It's maddening for somebody who's
Yes.
used to it. And for them, it's just like that. That's just how they operate. Like stuff gets lost. It's in the ether. Like, it's,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you just think like, oh, there's such a big, so I can imagine these kind of things. I want to move quickly while we still have just a couple of minutes. I want to move from tools and documentation more to personality. What kind of personality, is there a personality trait that is important or something that really suits this kind of role? Or is it like for anybody?
It helps if you're social, not necessarily extroverted. Like I myself, I'm not extroverted, but I do enjoy connecting with people, specifically on a one-on-one person level. I think it really helps if you are a little bit weird.
Check.
No, because it really, so every single leadership meeting tells you you need to be vulnerable in order to, because if you are vulnerable, then the other people, like those around you, feel safe and can also be vulnerable. And no one tells you what this, like, how are you, like, how does this look like? What does this mean in practice? And in my case, for example, I'm wearing a tiara. People don't talk with me about the weather when they meet me for the first time. They ask about the tiara, which makes for a very interesting, because from the tiara, we can actually branch out in a lot more interesting, into more interesting topics than from the weather.
Yeah. Yeah. The weather
And then
doesn't
like,
lead to a lot of
no,
options.
not really. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
in Britain it's raining, in Belgium as well, in Spain we have sun. Great. Like that's it. The
Yeah.
conversation is now over. And so, and then also like share things about your own life. Like you are a single mom. Amazing. You are anywhere on the neurodivergence spectrum or whatever. Like share these things and be proud of them, because this gives, if it makes other people feel safe.
It is amazing how quickly it does work. How quickly. And it doesn't have to be super personal. It can just be like your favorite picture, your favorite plant. It's right. So I love that. All right. And then as some of the very last questions, I'm trying to choose between the ones. So we've got personality in terms of, I'm going to go to just essential skills. Where would you, I mean, because it's such a broad role, you can't be good at everything. So
I think
what,
pattern recognition really helps. If you're
oh,
really good at pattern recognition. So my background is
okay.
actually political science, which basically teaches you how to, well, it also teaches you that you have to decide whether humans are inherently bad or not. But it
But don't
helps you
tell me
to
the
like,
answer. I want to believe.
it depends on whom you ask from the political philosophers. No, but basically it helps you to kind of see a lot of points and see the pattern that emerges. And you can definitely use AI and large language models in helping you seeing patterns. For example, in Slack, or there are like tools that can help you see, kind of get a pulse of what's going on. But like seeing, oh, this topic it has bubbled up over there, and then this other something is there. I have to look into this. So kind of seeing the bigger picture and not being afraid to actually talk to a lot of very different people, because from different hierarchy levels, from different part of the organization, basically to kind of figure out where are the things that are difficult for everyone, where are the
Right.
things everybody complains about, or where are the things that work really well, and then try to replicate those.
Do you do any kind of like pulse surveys or like automated things that takes the temperature of teams over time? I hear some organizations trying that. I'm intrigued. I've never seen it done
Yeah, I've
in practice.
seen it done. I think it's a little bit overrated because it kind of puts more focus on the more extroverted people, because obviously they generate more content that you can actually analyze. So it kind of skews a little bit to the people who are like more online available than others. Um, where I am now, there is the yearly, like we are bound to the corporate policies. So there is a yearly review, like where people can give feedback, etc., and then that get passed to us and we can analyze that. We don't do anything apart from that, but we do regular conversations with different people, and we have the open door policy, which is not great because the people have to self-select if they want to talk to you, but at least it is a start. And with the it's a little bit, if in a company that has 30 people, I would recommend different tools than if it's 200 people, than when it's
Yeah.
1,000 people, than when it's, I don't know, 6,000 people, because some things just don't scale.
Well, and also you have to remember, like you're highlighting a very uh, necessary reality of that it is a work in progress, and it's like there's no perfect organization,
No.
right, that runs perfectly. So yeah, so I would say also don't be disheartened. Like some things work better than others, and that's the challenge. Yeah, otherwise you'd be out of a job if it was a well-oiled machine.
Yeah,
No, I'm
and I
just kidding.
also think like as time goes on, we're going to, because a lot of heads of remote and a lot of hybrid organizations are honestly still experimenting.
Right.
And some of those experiments will work and some won't. That's the definition of an experiment. I, I would not be surprised if even for Amazon that everybody coming back 5 days to the office in the like big plan, that's just an experiment
Definitely. I mean,
to
they've
see
definitely
what
gone back
happens.
and forth
Yeah,
on a
and they
number of
can go,
things.
like, just because they say it now, it doesn't mean that 5 years from now they will still be remote, because at some point there will also be a generational change.
Absolutely. I mean, kids these days, yeah, but they're growing up collaborating with people playing video games from the age of 5. I mean, my neighbor learned how to
Exactly.
speak English on Minecraft,
Yeah,
right?
and I
It's
mean, I feel like we are the first generation where there are actually people who have always worked remotely. Like I have been working remotely for 15 years now. My office experience is like 3 years at the very beginning of my career. But there is an upcoming generation that has no idea how an office would work.
right,
And like
right.
they are also going to grow into like experts, not just individual contributors, but also into team lead. They're going to grow and they're going to expect more from companies. And at some point, as a company, it's like, okay, either I stop hiring now and then we will die out at retire out at some point, or we start accommodate for these things.
Yeah. I mean, because it seems like it's the reality. Everybody's going to have sick kids at home. Everybody's going to have bad weather, traffic things that prevent you from, working at
Yeah,
the
and
office. It's
I think
just a reality.
the biggest impact on remote work is the commute. Because
Has always
seriously,
been,
most
has always
people
been.
don't hate the office. Most people hate the commute, and they could never imagine a life without a commute. And then the pandemic came and they were like, wow, I can have breakfast with my kid. I can pick up my kid from school. I can like I have time to go for a run in the morning. I don't have to spend an hour and a half in traffic. And so specifically for companies who are only hiring in like the big hubs, if you are a single person in Barcelona, you can live very close to the office because you can rent a room. If you are a family, you're very hard pressed to find affordable housing close to where you work, which means that
Yeah.
one or both of the parents will have to commute for an hour or more during peak traffic times.
Yeah.
And there is a generation coming up that's not going to, they're going to say, I work to live, I don't live to work.
Well, yeah, and also
And I'm
hours
really
a
looking
day
forward
is
to
a
that.
lot.
Yeah.
Hours a day is a lot. I mean, yeah. All right. Oh, I could keep going, but I've already kept you minutes over. This always happens when, when we speak. I enjoy it too much.
That is
Thank you
very
for your
true.
flexibility with the time. And for everybody out there, thank you so much for joining us today. Be powerful.